Welcome to the fairest show on television. First tonight, the ghost, literally the ghost of Joe Biden. President Biden will not be physically on the debate stage Tuesday night, but his ghost will be in the room at that debate. It is the biggest debate in presidential history since the last debate in presidential history where one of the candidates dropped out. And Joe Biden's ghost is an enormous problem for both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Speaking of the 81-year-old lame duck president, he hit the trail today. That's a huge problem for Kamala Harris. She has said over and over and over again she wants to move on from the Biden-Harris administration.
We have dreams. We can see what is possible unburdened by what has been.
I am so proud to be running with Tim Walz for President of the United States and to bring America what I believe the American people deserve, which is a new way forward, and turn the page on the last decade.
Together, we will chart a new way forward. A future for freedom, opportunity of optimism and faith. We will move forward.
All right, so we are 5 nights away from the first debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Live pictures of Philadelphia. And Trump is still acting like Biden is the person he will face 5 days from now. Speaking in front of a room of some of the brightest economic minds today, he was in a swing state town hall last night. He remains, and this is an enormous problem for him, obsessed with the past.
Nearly 2/3 of the jobs created under the Harris-Biden administration were bounce-back jobs. And just last week, Joe Biden admitted that on social media. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris formed the worst presidency and vice presidency by far in the history of our country.
New Hampshire was so badly treated by the Democrat Party and by Joe Biden. And I'll be honest, if Joe Biden would be a great president, I would be happier than being the worst president in the history of our country, because I want to see what's good for the country. But I watched his interview of Joe Biden. It was like the softest interview I've ever seen.
Trump beating up on an old man he already beat out of the race. Well, it's not gentlemanly, but neither is Donald Trump most of the time. And it's not presidential either. But this is the most important part. Elections are about the future. Harris, of course, faces the ghost of Joe Biden actually on the stage. Carlos Lozada said it best in his opinion piece in the New York Times. Kamala Harris's debate conundrum. When it comes to the Biden years, Harris is both prosecutor and defendant, reformer and institutionalist, contrast and continuity. That's a harder sell. And Kamala Harris, if asked the right questions, must still answer for the Biden-Harris administration's failures and the unpopular policies. Bidenomics, the Afghanistan withdrawal, and support of Israel are some of the first things that come to mind. Yet she has an opportunity to thread the needle. So far, she's been doing it pretty successfully. Since he dropped out of the race, and this is the other thing to think about, Joe Biden's approval rating is the highest level since August of 2022 and climbing. In July, 36% of the country approved of his job as commander-in-chief. It's one of the reasons he dropped out. As of now, that number's up to 43%. The winner of Tuesday night will likely be decided by whoever can best handle their very big and very real problem with the ghost of Joe Biden. We begin tonight with George Will, NewsNation senior political contributor. Is this a little bit like the curse the Cubbies had for a while, or that the Red Sox had for a while, and they've got to figure out how to deal with it?
Well, the Cubs curse lasted 108 years, so I don't think this will last quite that long. It was interesting, Leland, the sound you just had from Kamala Harris. She said, a new way forward. The implication being the way we were going is inadequate, but she was there. She said, we're going to turn the page. What was wrong with the old page? Part of her problem is, her principal statement to the country is, acknowledging inflation, she says, I'm going to cure the inflation that I helped to unleash, because I was, as she likes to say, in the room when the important decisions were made. So it's a very awkward position to be a vice president running, as we've only seen once in 130-some years that an incumbent vice president gets elected president, and that was George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988. And at that point, people were saying, well, we were going to vote for Herbert Walker Bush because we really want a third Reagan term.
Right.
No one is saying we want a second Biden term.
To that point, right, how much can Donald Trump run against, and that's clearly what he's trying to do, Joe Biden?
He can't possibly do that. Someone has to take him aside, sit him down, put a cold compress on his forehead and say, Donald, you missed the part about Biden leaving the race. He clearly is having a tremendous amount of trouble being nimble and adjusting to new circumstances. Unfortunately, we want presidents who are nimble, who respond to and change in response to change circumstances. And so far, he's unable to do this.
He's been unable to do it on a couple of points. And look, this is somebody who inherently lives in the past and lives with past grievances. It's one of the reasons he got elected in 2016, but it's also one of the reasons he's having such a hard time now. Here is Donald Trump talking about the attack on him of whether he and J.D. Vance are weird, which was an attack leveled almost now 6 weeks ago. Take a listen.
There's something weird with that guy. He's a weird guy. J.D. is not weird. He's a solid rock. I happen to be a very solid rock. We're not weird. We're other things, perhaps, but we're not weird. But he is a weird guy. He walks on the stage. There's something wrong with that guy. And he called me weird. And then the fake news media picks it up. That was the word of the day. Weird, weird, weird. They're all going, but we're not weird guys. We're very solid people that want our country to be great again. I mean, it's very simple.
All right, so that was 11 times we counted. It goes on a little longer. It was more. I noticed even Sean Hannity was trying to take the shovel out of his hands.
Well, there's an old saying in politics, as you know, Leland, if you're explaining, you're losing. This is not quite explaining, but it's responding. It's being on the defensive. It's letting the other side set the terms of the argument. They called you weird, so I'll spend 11 times, whatever it was, saying, I'm not weird. Well, about the 11th time you say you're not weird, people say, that's weird.
Yeah, it's kind of what everyone's thinking. Kamala Harris is trying to do and promises to do, right, what Joe Biden didn't do in the last debate. And there was so much criticism that Joe Biden didn't attack Donald Trump enough. Here she is almost taunting, and probably not even almost, here she is taunting the schoolyard bully about saying it to my face. Take a listen.
I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say, say it to my face.
There's an old saying from the farm, and I'll modify it slightly, but you don't want to get into a manure fight with a farmer, right?
That's exactly right. And I think what we saw there, Leland, was a preview of coming attractions. The coming attraction is the plan she must have in her mind, or at least is being formulated, to detonate Donald Trump. She wants to leave the stage at the end of the debate with people saying, one of those, the woman, was more presidential than the other guy.
If you talk about being presidential, the one issue that Kamala Harris continues to have, I would actually say one, and they're almost one and the same, but she's trying to tack to the center, right? People have called it the Vince Lombardi Democrats. Do anything you can to win. Pledges to sign border bill, backs funding for enforcement, opposes assault weapons buyback, supports Israel's right to defense, against Medicare for all, won't ban fracking. You and I listened, I think, together to one of her speeches, and we almost said to ourselves, is this a Democrat or a Republican? It's this sort of very amorphous message. But at some point, and perhaps on the debate stage, she's going to have to explain this metamorphosis, this rapid change, especially if Donald Trump is able to in any way challenge her. That requires sort of letting the American people in on your thought process, which is something she's been unable to do because she can't speak contemporaneously. How big of a problem is that especially for dealing with the Joe Biden problem?
It's as big a problem as Donald Trump can make of it if he can be disciplined and focus on this. Her problem, and this is what he has to exploit, is she's saying, I said A, B, C, D, and E. I no longer believe A, B, C, D, and E. The listener says, well, why should we now believe that you don't believe what you used to believe? She's in a quagmire. Now, it's up to Donald Trump to make the most of this, and so far he's making the least of his opportunities, because when he's not running against Joe Biden, he's calling her names, and that will not cut it.
Right before the CNN debate, which even I think Donald Trump would admit went pretty well for Donald Trump, although there's this theory that it went a little too well for Donald Trump, he started complaining about the CNN anchors, and he's doing it again now about the ABC moderators. Take a listen.
Her best friend is the head of the network. Her husband's best friend is married to the head of the network. And they're going to get the questions. I've already heard they're going to get the questions in advance. I'm not sure it's going to help her that much.
Does he not have a point, though, in terms of how critical ABC's coverage has been?
On the other hand, he's putting ABC in a position where it has to bend over backward to look fair in this debate. The problem is, it seems to me, that this is just a version of his attack on the election procedures in the United States that began about this time in September in 2020, when he was saying preemptively, if I lose, it's because it was rigged. Now he's saying, if I lose the debate, it's because it was rigged. Now, these golden oldies that he keeps trotting out might work, but I don't think it's worked with regard to the rigged election of 2020, and I'm not sure it will soften the ground and prepare the country to watch the debate and say, this deck is stacked against Donald Trump.
Fair enough. Especially, look, with the foundation CNN set and how they purported themselves, it's difficult to argue that it is stacked, at least right now. George, great to see you as always. Looking forward to having you back in studio sometime soon, sir.
See you soon. Thanks.
All right. Kamala Harris, at one point, this is one of the things she said in the past, that she wants to keep cops out of America's schools. How many more kids and teachers would have died in Georgia had the school there listened to Kamala Harris? And Donald Trump now admits he lost the 2020 election. Good for him politically, but telling the truth could land the former president in jail if he loses the election.
Horrible, horrible election where I got many millions more votes than I got the first time, but didn't quite make it, just a little bit short.
Some troubling new information, and we hear this after every school shooting, about the missed warning signs before a young man allegedly shot and killed 4 people about an hour and a half northeast of Atlanta. This is new video you're seeing showing the suspect's weapon. So kids took this as they ran out of their classrooms. Sheriff's deputies interviewed the 14-year-old boy and his father a year ago. His online search history reportedly showed a fascination with previous massacres, particularly the shooting in Parkland, Florida. The suspect is identified as Colt Gray. He's going to be tried as an adult and is due in court for the first time tomorrow morning. One thing, though, that's not being talked about enough at all is the 2 men you see on your screen right now, Tanner Good and Brandon King, school resource officers who risked their lives. They ran to the sound of gunfire and confronted that 14-year-old boy. They were armed with pistols. He was armed with an assault rifle.
2 school resource officers assigned here to the school who immediately encountered the subject within just minutes of this report going out. Once they encountered the subject immediately surrendered to these officers.
6 minutes. That's how quickly they were able to stop the threat after the first alarms went off inside that school. Happened just before 10:30 Wednesday morning. 6 minutes is a long time. It's a lot less than the 90 or so minutes in Uvalde. But the discussion surrounding school resource officers has been a hot-button issue over the last 4 years. In fact, Kamala Harris once called for the removal of uniformed officers in schools, citing data that black students receive different treatment. Here she is back in October of 2019.
Again, what we need to do about demilitarizing our schools and taking police officers out of schools.
The following year, at least 50 districts cut back their school resource officer programs. Minneapolis, Portland, Oakland, Phoenix, Madison, Wisconsin, Columbus, Ohio, just to name a few. We'll let you decide what number of those cities have in common. It didn't work. The Denver School Board reversed course on a ban on police in schools. Robert Patillo, civil rights attorney based in Atlanta, is with us now. It's good to see you, my friend. It's been too long. Harris tacked so far to the left in 2019 when it comes to police, funding of police, then doubled down after the 2020 riots. Does she have an exposed flank here?
I don't think so. I think that what we understand is that these school shooting issues are a national problem here in America. We've had 385 mass shootings this year. That's 1.5 mass shootings per day. I think that we have to have very serious conversations on what are the best metrics and best practices to stop this from happening, because we don't see this in other organized democracies. I think what Kamala Harris is doing is using the data, using the information she's gained in the Senate as a prosecutor and as vice president to try to put in place a set of circumstances, a set of policies that will hopefully bring us to an end.
Robert, what more data do you want than 6 minutes? Then this young man could have killed dozens, and instead there were 2 armed officers in that school who ran to the sound of gunfire. What could be better protection?
What could be better protections when the police officers went to his house a year ago that something was actually done to monitor this individual and prevent him from getting weapons? Maybe 3 months after the police officers visited his house when his dad bought him an AR-15 for Christmas, maybe that doesn't take place either. So this idea that we're simply going to militarize schools till we end this problem as opposed to treating the root causes is the bigger issue. There are many steps where this could have been prevented. There are many failures. We venerate the heroes who stopped it, but we can't ignore the missteps beforehand.
Okay, so this is part of a bigger narrative from Kamala Harris, right? And there's been this arc where she ran as a hard-hitting prosecutor when she was attorney general. Then she became the ultimate social justice crusader in 2019 for her presidential race that didn't make it out of Iowa. And now she's back somewhere in the middle because her ads talk about her time as a prosecutor. This montage from 2020 is she was trying to bridge things as a vice presidential nominee. Take a listen.
The status quo has been to determine and create policy around the idea that more police equals more safety. And that's just wrong. We have to stop militarization of police. But that doesn't mean we get rid of police. Of course not. In many cities in America, over 1/3 of their city budget goes to police. So we have to have this conversation. What are we doing? What about the money going to social services?
You've often said that the reason the African-American vote had started to leave the Biden-Harris ticket, you and I haven't talked since Harris took over the top, was because they ignored African-American issues. One of the biggest African-American issues, we're told, is crime. Does Kamala Harris now get a second chance from black voters, or is she saddled with the failures that you so eloquently talked about of President Biden on the issues?
I think she has an opportunity, and I think that what she can talk about is the fact that she has learned from her time as a prosecutor till today. I think if anybody says they haven't changed their opinion in 10 years, they've wasted 10 years of their life. But I think she has to come through and start discussing these issues of restorative justice, of intervention, of dealing with the root causes of crime in communities, and how to have the best practices where we're not over-militarizing areas. You and I both have been in cities like Chicago in the 90s and early 2000s, where you were literally in a police state, where people could not move, could not breathe, could not interact in any type of civil society. Nobody wants to go back to that. So I think we have better practices and solutions that are in place today, and Kamala Harris has an opportunity to articulate that in 5 days of the debate. But I don't think we can either ignore the fact that Donald Trump has had about 6 positions on abortion in the last 2 weeks. And I don't think any of us fully understand where he stands on many of those issues either. So politicians are going to change.
We have a rule here. We have a rule here about whataboutism, because ideally someone who is like yourself is on advocating that their candidate is better than the other person, therefore they should be held. to a higher standard. I'll give you one more crack at this. As somebody who was in Chicago both in the early 2000s and then again lived there a couple of years ago, it had gotten so dangerous that so many people had moved out. You couldn't walk around anymore. So you went from maybe, if you're saying there were too many police, to there not being enough. People can choose for themselves which one they want. Is Donald Trump missing an opportunity, though? This is a guy who signed the Sentencing Reform Act, right? The First Step Act. Something like 90% of those whose sentences were commuted were African Americans. He doesn't talk about it. And I'm wondering if you think he's missing an opportunity.
He absolutely is. I think this is an opportunity to have a race to the top between both candidates as opposed to a race to the bottom. I would love to see both candidates put forward what their policies will be to reduce crime and violence, to increase economic opportunity in those communities, to really put it in place where we're no longer criminalizing large portions of the population while also reducing crime. I note rich communities don't need roving patrols of officers all the time, but yet and still have lower crime rates in other parts of the city. So there are ways to do it. We've seen it happen. I think both candidates should be campaigning on how they will fix the problem as opposed to attacking each other.
All right. Well, we all find out together in 5 days. Robert, it's good to see you. We'll have you back in Washington when you get back up north, all right?
Absolutely. See you soon.
Good to see you, my friend. So who exactly are working class voters? Both Harris and Trump say it's their base, while only one is telling the truth.
Costs are too high. But while corporations are gouging families, Trump is focused on giving them tax cuts. But Kamala Harris is focused on you.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
Bidenomics is working.
2/3 of Americans are just struggling to make ends meet.
And this comes after Friday's jobs report showing a spike in unemployment.
And we are very proud of Bidenomics.
Those are just some of the ads. Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, and their supporters will spend $10 billion airing over the next 60 days. Every election, the ads focus on a particular type of voter because they will decide the election. This election, it's working class voters. You might call them paycheck to paycheck voters, but there's far more to it. For example, a new CNN poll has Trump and Harris tied in Pennsylvania 47-47. But among white voters, they split along college-educated lines. Harris wins college-educated whites 59-37. Trump wins non-college-educated white 63-31. Lauren Wright, associate research scholar, lecturer in politics and public affairs, Princeton University, is with us to explain exactly what a working-class voter is. We start, though, with NewsNation's Robert Sherman, live in sunny Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he, too, has been inundated day in and day out with all of those ads on television. Good evening, Robert.
Hey there, Leland. And I think that might be a point of agreement you find between Republicans and Democrats on the campaign trail. We're about 2 months away from the election, and people are already sick of all the ads that they're seeing. The billboards, the radio spots, the television and digital ads, just like these, hitting the airwaves this week. Take a look.
Harris cast the tie-breaking vote that created America's inflation.
The vice president votes in the affirmative, and the bill is passed.
Economists said Harris's vote led directly to the higher prices we pay.
Trump's Project 2025 agenda will give him unchecked political power with no guardrails, and it would take black America backwards. Project 2025 would strip away our voting rights protections, and it eliminates the Department of Education. It would also require states to monitor women's pregnancies. It bans abortion and would rip away health coverage for millions.
So if you don't like ads like that, I got bad news for you. You're going to be seeing a lot of them through November 5th, with Democrats flooding the zone with cash in all these major battleground states: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Arizona. Republicans, a bit of a different story, though, according to the firm Ad Impact. Distantly behind in ad investing in Arizona and Michigan, but keeping mostly in lockstep in Pennsylvania and Georgia. And that is very clearly a big part of the Trump campaign here, Leland, because if the former president holds all the states he won in 2020, but flips Georgia and flips Pennsylvania, that's 270 electoral votes right on the nose. Leland?
270 to win. That's the number we keep talking about. Robert Sherman, thank you very much. We'll check in with you on the trail. Lauren Wright back with us. And Lauren, I think we have to start and be so careful in the words, because you heard Kamala Harris talk about middle class. You hear Donald Trump talk about working class. You heard the distinction, right, between college educated and non-college educated. Where is the fault line, or where is the divide really here?
It really depends who you ask. I mean, a lot of Harris critics, for instance, are pointing out that she comes from an extraordinarily educated background. Her parents were professors and researchers, and she's still calling herself middle class. So she seems to be calling middle class an income level of some sort. Trump and I think Republicans are talking about middle class working voters as this group that's shifted to Republicans in recent years, and that's a new phenomenon.
So that is
non-college educated
non-college educated voters,
yes,
right?
Correct.
Almost irrespective sometimes of wealth or of salary. I feel like there's a values or a traditional value set. This I thought was really interesting. Randy Weingarten, the head of the teachers union, right, who demanded schools close, which hurt working class, poor voters, kids the very most. Trump says he's a champion of working people, but he's a world-class scam artist. He's stiffed hundreds of workers, painters, plumbers, dishwashers, lawyers, and others. He was fined millions for ripping off charities and duping students to a sham Trump University. Trump isn't looking out for American workers. What I noticed there is she's listing painters, plumbers, dishwashers. That's different than lawyers and teachers because it comes down to this issue of college education.
Well, a lot of them are voting for him. And so Democrats, really by a slim majority, but in the last couple of years have become a majority college-educated party. The same is not true for Republicans. Most people in this country do not go to college. That's a simple fact I think Democrats forget when they have these progressive policies like student loan forgiveness. Most people see it as unfair. Most people don't get there.
So this is white, non-college educated voters. And Kamala Harris, to be fair, has made up an enormous amount on Joe Biden when it comes to African-American and Latino non-college educated voters. Where does the fault line finally come down between race and economic standing?
And actually where I thought you were going was she's eaten into Trump's lead in recent days among non-college educated voters. And so Trump can't make any assumptions there. But I think the problem she has is when Democrats have this laser focus on affinity groups and people of certain racial and ethnic backgrounds, that you could say the same thing about gender, this idea of identity politics. All of those groups across the board are mad about the same issues everybody else is. They still have the economy, immigration, and crime as top issues. And so Trump can do some good work there if he stays on message.
Speaking of message, it's interesting if you listen to the messages, not about abortion or other issues, but specifically the economic message from both Trump and Harris. We have them back to back.
Tax cuts and reform in American history by far, slashing rates for working families and cutting the business tax from the highest in the world.
And my vision of an opportunity economy is one where everyone can compete and have a real chance to succeed, where everyone, regardless of who they are, where they start, can build wealth, including intergenerational wealth, where workers are treated with dignity and everyone has the freedom to join a union if they choose.
Bill O'Reilly made the point that this is starting to look like the 1980 election, right? In so much as that you had a unpopular incumbent Democrat. I see you going back and forth in your head, and I'm wondering, I view it the same way, right? Because the "are you better off than you were 4 years ago" question may not work.
Yes, but Trump is historically divisive and unlikable. I mean, he left office with barely 60% approval among Republicans. Do you know what Obama had when he left office among Democrats? It was 90%. So we forget that this is someone who's divided his own party, and most people think is a very controversial figure, to say the least. He is not Ronald Reagan by any stretch.
Right, and there was a great point made by George Will that really Ronald Reagan was the last president to get a third term, because everybody elected George H.W. Bush, hoping to get Ronald Reagan for another 4 years. Lauren, it's always great to have you. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
All right. The last time Kamala Harris ran for president, She said the planet's future required us all drive electric cars, not popular with working class voters. Why she wants us to think, important word, think, that her plan is now in reverse.
Well, for all of us who are used to, filling our tank, you usually can smell it and you can hear it. You can hear the guzzling sound.
Right.
None of that. So how do I know it's actually working?
It is.
In the suburban Atlanta school shooting, 54-year-old Colin Gray, who's Colt Gray's father, faces counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, 8 counts of cruelty to children. Police say his 14-year-old son opened fire on classmates yesterday just before 10:30 a.m. The teenager is due in court tomorrow morning. There's a press conference at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Eastern, where the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is going to talk about this. And you might have heard this was almost predicted by our previous guest. Robert Patillo was on. He's a civil rights lawyer out of Atlanta, and said that if the father purchased the rifle after the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and other police had interviewed Colin Gray and Colt Gray over threats last year, and if the father purchased the rifle for Christmas in the interceding time, the father should be arrested. And that is exactly what the Georgia Bureau of Investigation has done. This is a stunning development. You'll remember that the parents of a teenager in Michigan who murdered folks at his school, murdered some kids and teachers at his school, was charged. That was the first time that happened. This is the second time this has happened, and would be an extraordinary development, and perhaps something now that is going to put the fear of responsibility into parents who own these kinds of weapons if their children who have some awful plans with those weapons get their hands on them. We'll know a lot more in terms of what the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's evidence is in the next hour or so, but the fact that they have done this the day after made the arrest of the father tells you they have some pretty clear and convincing evidence that they found about the father of Colt Gray, that is Colin Gray, who has now been arrested for his son's actions with an AR-15 at school that killed 2 students and 2 teachers. More on the breaking news as it develops, and we will press on here. At the Republican National Convention, we were there back in July. It seems like so long ago. The loudest unexpected applause line that Donald Trump got was his promise to end the electrical vehicle mandate, and he said as much again today.
To further defeat inflation, my plan will terminate the Green New Deal, which I call the Green New Scam. Kamala spent $7.5 billion to build 8 charging stations. I will end the electric vehicle mandate, stop the appalling waste, and save taxpayers an estimated $1 trillion.
The EV mandate shows how out of touch Washington is with rural, even semi-rural Americans, working class Americans that we talked about. If you don't understand why, you're part of the problem. Evidently, Team Harris, though, heard the applause in Milwaukee and now says she is against the mandate. Alex Thompson, our buddy at Axios, took it a step further. Here's his reporting. On August 28th, Axios asked the Harris campaign to clarify her position and whether she would sign or veto a bill that she co-sponsored in 2019 that included an EV mandate for manufacturers. Harris's campaign ultimately declined to comment. If you are listening, ABC, you are free to turn this into a debate question. Kurt Bardella is with us, NewsNation contributor, Democratic strategist, LA Times contributor, and former House GOP Oversight Committee member. Kurt, why would it be so hard if she does indeed now not want an EV mandate to say, of course I would veto that bill?
You know, I'm kind of in the mindset that you never have to answer anyone's question. You can just say what you want to say. I mean, listen, we've watched Republicans do that successfully for the better part of 8 years. Why give a substantive, specific answer when you don't have to? Just because a reporter asks you something doesn't mean you have to answer it. And I have no problem right now with this pragmatic approach to dealing with the press.
Okay, so we're in the vibe election now, right? That Kamala Harris thinks that she doesn't have to answer anything. It's interesting, right? Because Democrats were all aghast if Donald Trump didn't answer questions. But I think this goes to a deeper issue in terms of really where the country is on things and how the pendulum is swinging. We'll play it back to back. Kamala Harris talking in 2019 about pushing the Green New Deal, and Trump at the RNC about the EV mandate. Take a listen.
Climate change is real. And it poses an existential threat to us as human beings. And it is within our power to do something about it. I am supporting the Green New Deal.
And I will end the electric vehicle mandate on day one. Thereby saving the U.S. auto industry from complete obliteration, which is happening right now, and saving U.S. customers thousands and thousands of dollars per car.
The difference, of course, right, is that Kamala Harris's 2019 campaign didn't go anywhere. Trump is now the nominee, and Kamala Harris has become at least agnostic to the EV mandate. Why is this a third rail? What does the EV mandate really signify to so many people?
Well, I think it's more about it didn't work. I mean, apples to apples, you look at it, I think the hope was that having some kind of mandate would spur a certain amount of volume and production, and that's just not what happened. And so I think it's refreshing that we have someone in a leadership position who's willing to look at the situation and go, you know what, that's just not a winning hand. Like, this is the kind of pragmatism I want from our political leaders. You know, there was all this conversation of, will Kamala Harris be held hostage by the base, by the Green New Deal people, by the extreme left? And she's showing you every day, no, she won't. She's willing to reconsider fracking.
I'm going to take the last word, Kurt. No, she's not showing anything because she's not talking about it. You just said that at the top of the show.
Well, from what I read in Alex's piece, they said she does not support.
They said she won't even say it. Okay, all right. I admire the attempt. We will see you in studio soon, my friend. Thank you.
I'll see you next week, Leland.
All right, Donald Trump is now admitting that the big lie was just that, a lie in 2020. Why it's politically smart but potentially disastrous all at the same time. First time in his life, Donald Trump is admitting he's a loser. It's perhaps the hardest thing the former president has ever done. His language about the 2020 election is now markedly different than before.
This was the last week in office for me because of a horrible, horrible election where I got many millions more votes than I got the first time, but didn't quite make it, just a little bit short. We got the most votes of anybody, of any sitting president in history, and he beat us by a whisker. So I was told if I got 63 million, which is what I got the first time, you would win. You can't not win. And I got millions of more votes than that, and lost by a whisker.
Evidently, Trump's aides finally convinced him that swing voters don't like sore losers, or those who claim they won when they did not. But what Trump's doing for political gain, it's the only way to look at it, could cost him a felony conviction if he loses the election. In fact, today, the irony, special counsel Jack Smith filed new documents in the January 6th election case against Trump. One they hope will get around the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. With us now, Tom Dupree, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under George W. Bush. I am not a lawyer. I do not play one on TV, but I do watch a lot of Law and Order episodes. Anything you can and say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Are Trump's lawyers just slapping themselves in the face after Trump said all that stuff?
Well, they probably are, Leland, but, to be honest, I'm sure they slap themselves in the face on a daily basis because he often makes statements that may serve political interests, but the lawyers who represent him say, oh, my God, you're torpedoing our defense. And look, to your point, I think you're absolutely right. It was probably politically smart for Trump to admit he lost the election. But legally, that sure could have consequences, right? Because the whole thrust of Jack Smith's indictment is that Trump was trying to defraud and to cheat and to steal an election he didn't win. And if he's now admitting, well, maybe he actually knew all along he had really lost, well, and he's not really, defending the accuracy of the vote. He really was trying to steal something. So there could sure well be legal consequences to this.
Right now, it's when did you decide that you actually lost. Jack Smith's case against Trump, count one, conspiracy to defraud, conspiracy to obstruct, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, conspiracy against rights, and this is the refiling that happened. We understand part of the judge's ruling today is that there is going to be evidence released before the election, which is something Jack Smith wanted. Why the Department of Justice wants evidence released before an election when they say they're not political, I guess is suspect now. But what might we learn?
I think what we're going to learn are more details about what unfolded during the month of January 2021. Specifically, I suspect we'll see things like grand jury testimony, things that witnesses have said that haven't yet been put in the public record about what the former president was thinking, what he was doing behind the scenes on those days, whether in fact he was trying to coordinate a slate of false electors, all that sorts of evidence. I understand why the Trump campaign doesn't want that going into the public domain. I think from the Justice Department's perspective, they realize they're not going to get a trial before the election. This is probably about as close as they're going to get, at least before the election, to having a trial.
What happened to all those rules, though, about the Justice Department not wanting to do anything up close to an election because they are completely nonpartisan and only professionals and non-political in every way?
Well, that's the hope and that's the standard. But, you know, in this case, I think you could make a credible argument that kind of all of that has gone out the window. Look, my guess is that when we get, closer to the election, and obviously we're pretty darn close right now, but you got to think they will go quiet at some point. I mean, right now we're certainly within striking distance, a couple months away or so from the election. Yeah. You would think that they would turn down the litigation volume a little bit. My guess is they will go silent maybe when we get, say, a month away.
Boy, times have changed. Tom Dupree, your analysis is always appreciated, as is your service. Thank you, my friend. Good to see you.
Thanks, Leland.
Speaking of legal precedent, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation just announced that they have arrested the father of the alleged school shooter from yesterday. This is enormous. And finally, perhaps, we are getting to a point where there is actually something that can be done and is being done to stop school shootings. A lot more on that tomorrow. Here's Chris.